Caleb Morrow had not planned to be the kind of man who packed his daughter's lunch at 5:30 in the morning. He had not planned a lot of things. His wife, Joanna, had been the one with the plans. She kept a whiteboard calendar on the kitchen wall with different colors for each of them. Blue for Caleb, green for herself, yellow for their daughter Nadia. After Joanna died, the whiteboard stayed up for almost a year. Caleb couldn't bring himself to erase it. Eventually Nadia, who was 7 at the time and old enough to understand more than adults gave her credit for, took the eraser herself one Saturday morning and wiped it clean. She didn't say anything. She went back to her cereal. Caleb stood in the doorway to the kitchen and had to look at the ceiling for a long moment. That was 3 years ago. Now Nadia was 10 and particular about her sandwiches. No mustard, only a thin layer of mayonnaise, the crusts removed only on Tuesdays and Thursdays, for reasons she had never fully explained. Caleb had learned not to ask. He wrapped the sandwich in wax paper the way she preferred, slid it into her bag alongside an apple and a thermos of hot chocolate. Edmonton in October was not a city that forgave forgetting warm drinks, and set the bag by the front door before she was even out of bed. He had 45 minutes before his shift at Vantage Industrial started. He used 20 of them to sit at the kitchen table with his coffee and a service manual he'd been studying on his own time. His employer didn't require it. The manual covered diagnostic protocols for a hydraulic press system that Vantage had purchased secondhand and never fully understood. Caleb had started reading it because the machine kept behaving strangely and no one else seemed particularly concerned. He was a mechanic. That was the official title. The job paid reasonably well for what it asked, which was not much beyond showing up on time and replacing whatever the work order said to replace. Caleb did that. He also did more, quietly, without being asked, because his mind worked in a way that couldn't leave a problem alone once it had noticed one. He had a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Alberta. He had graduated second in his class. He had worked for a large infrastructure firm in his 20s, spent 4 years in industrial safety consulting, and left it all when Joanna got sick, because someone had to be home more. He'd taken the Vantage job because it was close and the hours were predictable. That had been 3 years ago. He had stayed because leaving required more ambition than grief currently allowed. His colleagues knew none of this. He had not volunteered it. They knew him as the quiet guy who always fixed the thing before someone officially decided the thing needed fixing. The call came on a Wednesday. Caleb almost didn't answer. He was under the 3rd press unit, tracing a hydraulic line he suspected had been misrouted during a repair 6 months before he'd been hired. His phone vibrated in his chest pocket. He checked the screen out of habit. The number was unfamiliar, Vancouver area code, and let it go to voicemail. He listened to the message during his lunch break, sitting on a stool outside the loading bay, where the air smelled like cold pavement and machine oil. The voice on the recording was professional and slightly clipped, the way voices got when they were accustomed to not being kept waiting. A woman, she introduced herself as the executive assistant to the chief operating officer of Norland Pacific Holdings. The COO's name was Ms. Ingrid Solberg. They were in Edmonton for a board summit that would run through Friday. Their transportation had fallen through. The driver had been in a minor accident that morning, nothing serious, but he wouldn't be available for the remainder of the week. Someone at a local staffing agency had given them Caleb Morrow's name. They needed someone reliable, discreet, and available starting tomorrow morning. The rate was generous. Would he call back? Caleb sat with his thermos and thought about it. He had done occasional driving work before, a year or 2 back, when money had been tighter, and a friend who ran a small car service had called in a favor. He had a clean record, a late-model Audi his brother-in-law had sold him at cost, and a face that people tended to find unremarkable enough to say things in front of. He called back. He spoke to the assistant, whose name was Priscilla, and confirmed the details. He called his neighbor, Mrs. Therial, who had an informal arrangement with Caleb to take Nadia for breakfast and the school run on mornings when his shifts started early. Mrs. Theriault said it was no trouble. It never was. Caleb thanked her the way he thanked her every time, simply, without excess, and spent the evening polishing his car and pressing his one good jacket. Nadia watched him from the doorway of the hallway. "You look nervous," she said. "I'm not nervous. You pressed that same spot twice." He looked down at the jacket. She was right. He set the iron aside. "I'm doing some driving work this week," he said, "for a company downtown." Nadia absorbed this. What kind of company? Finance, real estate, that sort of thing. Are they nice? I haven't met them yet. She considered that. "I hope they're nice to you," she said, in the particular tone she sometimes used, not quite childlike, not quite adult, that reminded him so much of Joanna that he had to look at the jacket again instead of at her. "Go to bed," he said. "It's 9:15. She went. He stood in the hallway for a moment after her door closed, and then he finished with the jacket. Ingrid Solberg was not a woman who wasted a sentence. She was 44 years old, the chief operating officer of Norland Pacific Holdings, and she had been in that role for 6 years. Before that, she had spent 8 years at a firm in Toronto doing the work that COOs do before they become COOs, fixing the operational problems that CEOs are too visible to fix themselves, and CFOs too focused on the numbers to notice. She was not the most famous person at Norland Pacific. That was fine with her. She was the one who made sure the famous people's plans actually worked. She was also, this week, exhausted in a way that she hadn't been in some time. The board summit had surfaced a dispute she had seen coming for months. 2 members with competing visions for a northern infrastructure acquisition, and managing the fallout while maintaining her own position required the kind of sustained political precision that left very little room for things like sleep. When Caleb pulled up to the Fairmont at 7:15 on Thursday morning, Ingrid came through the revolving door at 7:16 with her phone in one hand and a leather folder in the other. She did not look at the car. She did not look at Caleb. She got in, said, "The Norland offices on 101st, please," and went back to her phone. Caleb drove. He had learned, during his earlier driving work, that most people in the back seat did not want conversation. They wanted the illusion of privacy. He provided it. He kept his eyes on the road and his comments to zero. Somewhere on Jasper Avenue, Ingrid took a call. The conversation was oblique. She was careful, he noted, even on what appeared to be a secure line. But she said enough for him to understand that someone inside the summit had been sharing information they shouldn't have. A position document, prepared confidentially for her working group, had evidently reached the opposing faction before yesterday's session. She said the words, "That is not a draft I circulated," in a tone that was very quiet and very controlled, which, Caleb had found, was usually more serious than raised voices. He said nothing. He drove. He parked outside the building on 101st and stayed with the car while she was inside, and when she came back out at noon, he drove her to a lunch meeting at a hotel 3 blocks away and waited again. She came back to the car and sat for a moment without telling him to drive anywhere. "I need to stop at the Norland office again," she said finally. "But not yet." "Give me 10, of course," he said. Silence. He watched the street. A delivery truck was blocking the far lane. Someone on the sidewalk was arguing with a parking meter, which wasn't an argument the person was going to win. "The traffic is lighter on 100th, he said. Not a suggestion, just a fact. Ingrid looked up from her phone. It was the first time she had looked at him directly. He had a steady face, not unfriendly, just still, in the way that certain kinds of patients become. "Why?" she asked. "There's a water main issue 1 block east. They've had irregular closures for 2 weeks. I'd give it another week, at least, before it clears." A pause. "You know the city. I've lived here most of my life." She looked at him for another moment, then went back to her phone. When she said, "Okay, let's go," a few minutes later, she didn't specify the route. He took 100th. It was on Friday morning that things changed. Caleb arrived at the Fairmont at 7 again. He was 10 minutes early, as he had been each day, and he waited in the car and reviewed the day's schedule, Priscilla had emailed him the night before. 2 meetings in the morning, a working lunch, then the full board session at 2, which, based on everything Caleb had absorbed without trying to absorb it, was where the week's central conflict would either be resolved or made significantly worse. Ingrid appeared at 7:03. She was carrying the same leather folder. She was also carrying, tucked under her arm, a second folder, this one gray, slightly thinner. She sat down and opened the gray folder immediately. Then she stopped. She turned back to the first page, then the third. Then she held the third page up and looked at it for a long moment in the morning light. Caleb was watching the road, but also, in the way that certain professions train you to watch things, watching her reflection in the mirror. "Is something wrong?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "This document," she said. "The analysis on page 3, the depreciation schedule." A pause. "This is not the number I approved." Caleb waited. "The figure here is 11.4, she said. "I signed off on 9.8 2 weeks ago." She closed the folder, opened it again. "This is the copy I've been carrying. This folder has not left my possession." "Could it have been printed in error?" he said. "The formatting is identical. The font, the header, the logo. This isn't a draft mix-up. Someone produced a second version of this document and placed it in this folder." She said it the way people said things when they were working out whether they were correct and hoping they were wrong. "Sometime in the last 3 days." "When did you last open that folder?" she thought. "Tuesday, before I flew in." Caleb said, "Your hotel room has had housekeeping access. You've had the folder with you in meetings, in the car, in the lobby. Any of those points." She looked at him in the mirror. "You're describing a fairly sophisticated interference. I'm describing what's possible. You'd know better than I would what's likely." A silence settled in the car that was different from the silences earlier in the week. She was thinking. He let her think. He took the turn onto 101st and kept his speed even and his presence as quiet as the car allowed. "The board session this afternoon presents the analysis from this document," she said, as much to herself as to him. "If the figure is 11.4 instead of 9.8, the acquisition numbers don't hold. The opposing faction gets what they need to stall the project another quarter. Is a quarter enough to kill it?" Yes. Caleb thought about that. He thought about the hydraulic press at Vantage, the misrouted line that had been causing intermittent pressure failures for 6 months before he'd found it. He thought about how something can be wrong for a long time before anyone looks in the right place. "You have the original file somewhere," he said. "Not a printout. The actual file, with its metadata, creation date, last modified timestamp, the user ID it was saved under." She was already reaching for her phone. "My assistant can pull it. The metadata will show you when the modified version was created, and whose credentials were used." She stopped, looked at the back of his head in the mirror, then at his face when he glanced back for a moment. "How do you know about document metadata?" "I know about systems," he said. "How they record what happens to them. It's the same principle, whether it's a file or a machine." She called Priscilla while they were still in the car. Caleb parked outside the building and waited, and this time, Ingrid did not get out immediately. She sat on the phone for 11 minutes. When she hung up, she was quiet for another moment. "The modified file was created Wednesday evening," she said, "at 9:47 p.m., using credentials registered to a member of my working group." She said the name that followed in the same flat, controlled tone she used for most things, but it clearly cost her something to say it. Caleb said nothing. He was not there for that part. He was the driver. "I need to speak with legal before the 2 o'clock, she said. "I can have you there in 8 minutes. Do that." He did. The situation that unfolded over the following hours was not something Caleb witnessed directly. He spent most of it parked in various locations around downtown Edmonton, reading the service manual he'd brought along in the seat pocket, the one on hydraulic diagnostics. At 12:40, Priscilla called to say that the 2 o'clock session had been moved. At 1:15, Ingrid came out of the legal office building, got in the car, and said nothing for 3 blocks. Then she said, "It's handled." He didn't ask how. "The individual involved," she said, "will not be attending the afternoon session." Caleb drove. "Norland's legal team is satisfied with the documentation chain. We'll present the original analysis this afternoon. The acquisition moves forward." A pause. A quarter's delay would have cost the project. The communities involved have been waiting 2 years for this infrastructure development. He hadn't known that detail. It landed differently than he expected. He thought about the hydraulic press again, about the machine downstream of a misrouted line, working harder than it should, for longer than it should, because the fault was upstream and nobody was looking for it. "That's a good outcome," he said. She glanced at him in the mirror. "It is." They drove for another block in silence. "You knew what to look for in that document," she said. "You asked the questions in the right order." He didn't answer right away. "Caleb." It was the first time she had used his name. "What did you do before this?" He watched the light ahead go yellow. He slowed. "I was an engineer," he said. "Industrial. Safety systems, mostly." He kept his eyes on the road. "I took a step back a few years ago. Personal reasons. What kind of engineer? Mechanical. But systems are systems. The principles hold." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're working as a driver. This week." "Yes. What do you do the rest of the time?" "I work at an industrial facility." General maintenance. He could hear how it sounded. He had stopped minding how it sounded some years back. "It pays consistently and the hours are predictable. I have a daughter, 10 years old." Predict her attention shift. It was a different kind of attention than before. "Single father?" she said. "Yes." "How long?" 3 years. She didn't say she was sorry. He appreciated that. People who hadn't lost someone often said they were sorry and didn't know what to do after they tit. She simply absorbed the information and sat with it. "My son is 12, she said after a moment. It wasn't a confession. It was an equivalence. He understood it as such. He nodded once. The light changed. He drove. The board session apparently went well. Caleb knew this because Priscilla texted him at 4:52 to say Ms. Solberg would be out in 20 minutes, and when Ingrid came through the lobby doors at 5:14, she was moving with the particular ease of someone who had been braced for impact and found the landing cleaner than expected. She got in the car. "Airport," she said. "Of course." They took the Henday. The city was behind them, going amber in the late afternoon light the way Edmonton did in October, reluctantly, brilliantly, like it resented being beautiful but couldn't help it. Nadia would be at Mrs. Theriault's for another hour. He'd texted her during a break to say he'd pick her up by 6, and she had replied with a drawing of what appeared to be a dog wearing a hat, which meant she was fine. "I want to ask you something," Ingrid said. "Okay, and I want you to answer honestly, because I will be able to tell if you're being polite instead." He glanced in the mirror. "All right, Norland Pacific has an asset management division in Edmonton," she said. "We've been trying to fill a senior systems integrity position for 8 months. The role is what it sounds like, evaluating the operational soundness of the assets we acquire, industrial, infrastructure, occasionally real estate. We need someone who can walk into a facility and understand what's actually happening versus what the paperwork says is happening." She paused. "Based on this week, and specifically on this morning, I believe you can do that." Caleb kept his eyes on the road. "I'm not making this offer because I'm grateful," she said. "I want that to be clear. I make bad decisions when I'm grateful. I'm making this offer because you identified a document irregularity that my entire team missed, walked me through the diagnostic logic in under 3 minutes, and have otherwise spent the week being exactly where you said you'd be. Exactly when you said you'd be there, without requiring anything from me." She paused again. "Those qualities are rarer than the engineering degree." He said nothing for a moment. The highway spread out ahead of them, flat and wide, the kind of road that gives you time to think if you let it. "What does the role pay?" he said. She told him. He didn't react visibly, which he suspected she appreciated. "And the hours," he said. "Structured with flexibility required for travel." probably 6 to 8 trips a year, mostly within Alberta and BC. I'd need to know those dates well in advance. That's reasonable. My daughter's schedule is the constraint, he said, not a negotiating point. A fact, understood. He drove for another few kilometers. An 18-wheeler pulled out ahead of them, and he changed lanes with the unhurried ease of someone who had been driving in Alberta winters long enough to understand that patience on the road was not passivity but physics. "Can I have a week to think about it?" he said. "Yes, I'll need the position description in writing. Priscilla will send it tonight." He nodded. She looked out the window at the flat October land moving past, and he drove, and neither of them said anything for a while, and it was a comfortable silence. Not the silence of strangers managing proximity, but the silence of two people who had each decided the other was worth being quiet around. At the departure's drop-off, he pulled to the curb and put the car in park. She gathered her folders, both of them, and reached for the door. "Caleb," she said. "Mrs. Solberg, Ingrid." She said it briefly, matter-of-factly. Like a correction on a form, he nodded once. "Ingrid." She got out. He watched her go through the automatic doors, the gray folder and the leather one both under her arm, her stride even and unhurried. She didn't look back. He had not expected her to. He pulled away from the curb and drove back through the city, toward the neighborhood where his daughter was waiting. And the service manual was on the passenger seat. And the evening was cold and clear, in the way that Edmonton evenings are when the season has finally committed. And somewhere in him something that had been very still for a long time felt, not loudly or suddenly, but in the way a pressure system changes before you see it in the sky, like it was considering moving again. He picked up Nadia at Mrs. Theriol's at 6:10. She had made a drawing she wanted to show him, an actual drawing this time, not a text. A piece of paper she pressed into his hands in the front hallway. It was a house with a large garage beside it, and a figure in the garage that she had labeled Dad in her careful printing, and the figure was surrounded by small shapes that were presumably machines, and above the garage she had written, in the same careful letters, "Figuring it out." He folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. He made dinner. He helped with homework. He sat at the kitchen table after Nadia was in bed and read the position description that arrived from Priscilla's email at 8:47, and he read it twice. And he set his phone face down on the table and looked at the blank whiteboard calendar on the kitchen wall. The one that had stayed blank since that Saturday 3 years ago. And for the first time in a longer while than he could precisely name, he thought about what colors he might use.